Good day to all of you. So, our topic for today is all about general principles, which is the part two of our video tutorial. So, in this video tutorial, we will be tackling or discussing the inherent and constitutional limitations. So, we all know that from the previous topic or previous part of our video is taxation is very broad in scope and it's really powerful and it's the strongest among the um, powers of the state, inherent powers of the state. That is why the Constitution puts limitations on granting the power to tax. Okay, so allow me to share my screen for you. And so we'll begin with the inherent limitations. And so when we say inherent limitations, these are natural restrictions to safeguard and ensure that the power of taxation shall be exercised by the government only for the betterment of the people whose interests should be served, enhanced, and protected. So we have five inherent limitations. First one is taxes may be levied only for public purposes. Wala nang ibang purpose kundi for public lang. Okay? So the power of taxation flows forth from the legitimate objective of supporting the services of the government. Actually, diniscuss natin to on the previous video tutorial, but ibabalik lang natin siya. It should be and must be levied only for public purposes. So public taxes are considered public money and they must be used to finance and recognize public needs. Okay, so these taxes are used to finance construction or maintenance of roads, di ba? Pag may pinapatayo tayong mga roads and bridges from the DPWH, actually that came from our taxes. Okay? Sa mga taxpayers. Yan. Aside from roads and bridges, could be in the form of healthcare, education, or security, promotion of science and commerce and industry and others. Basta, ang pinaka-purpose na is for public and for the welfare. Ayan. So the Supreme Court also held that the legislature has no power to appropriate public services for anything but for public purpose. Napaka pinagbabawal yan. Yun ng Korte Suprema na hindi pwedeng gamitin yung public funds for any purpose other than for public purpose only. Okay? So thus, in order to consider appropriation of taxes valid, it must be for the common good of the people. No individual or private person should primarily be enriched or benefited for the public funds. And but then again, we hear issues, diba? Which is always that there is corruption in the government. Hindi lang naman dito sa Pilipinas but in other places also. May mga instances talagang gano'n. But we don't have evidence yet, di ba? Wala tayong evidence sa pinangahawakan. That's still just an issue. Okay. Ayan. So, public money or taxes must be levied only for public purposes. Okay. So, next is being inherently legislative, taxation may not be delegated. Okay, so that being said, we all know that the power to taxation or the taxation is essentially a legislative function. Okay, so the lawmaking body of the government and its political subdivisions exercise the power of taxation. The powers to enact the laws and ordinances and impose to collect taxes are given only to the Congress. Si Congress lamang po ang may karapatang gumawa, okay, ayan, ng mga ordinansa or tax laws and i-impose ito and collect taxes that are given also to the Congress. Meaning, hindi po pwedeng magmumula yung batas, yung paggawa ng batas doon sa Senado. Okay, dadaan talaga yan sa House of Representatives. Yung mga House of Representatives, yan yung inelect natin na mga representative per municipalities, ayan, per districts. Kung sino-sino yan sila all around the Philippines, sila-sila din yung gagawa ng batas. Okay? So ipapasaya nila sa Senado for revisions and review, and if ever may mga suggestion, si Senate, ayun, i-represent naman nila yan sa Congress. And if ever hindi magkasundo ang Congress tsaka yung Senado, hindi naman nangangahulugan na hindi siya magiging batas na. Meron po tayong bicameral na sila yung mag-harmonize ng versions ng Kongreso at saka ng Senado. Okay? So dito, hindi siya pwedeng i-delegate imposition of tax laws. Pero may mga other na pwedeng i-delegate other than the making of tax laws. Making of tax laws lang kasi okay ang pinagbabawal, pero kapag administrative functions lang naman for collection and implementation of the taxation power, which is to collect taxes from the local, okay, pwede namang i-delegate yan sa mga local RDOs, Revenue District Office, like PIR here in the Gensan. Ayun, pwedeng i-delegate yung administrative function only. Okay, so, ayan. In the strict sense, the power to make tax laws cannot be delegated to the other branches of the government, since peculiarly and exclusively legislative in nature, the power to make tax laws cannot be exercised by the executive or judicial branch of the government. Therefore, when the power to tax is delegated to local government units, ito yung sinabi ko kanina, only the legislative branch of the LGU can exercise the power. Also, if delegated to the president, it is limited only to administrative discretion. So I already discussed this one on the previous material or previous video tutorial. So parang refresh na lang natin to. Okay? Ayan. So what may not be delegated again is the power to make tax laws. Pero yung mga administrative functions or duties, ayan, pwede namang i-delegate. Okay? So sana maliwanag tayo dyan. Next is, the power is limited to territorial jurisdiction of the state. Now, in here, the taxing authority observes tax situs. Ayan, because the country's laws are effective and enforceable only within its territorial limits. Pero again, okay, review lang natin, we have this privity of relationship. Okay? So, the state can still exercise its taxing powers over its citizen outside the country, yung mga non-residents natin. It is because the fundamental basis of the right to tax is the capacity of the government to provide benefits and protection to the object of the tax. So the state cannot tax property wholly or exclusively within the jurisdiction of another. A state, since it does not afford protection in property beyond its territorial limits. So may limits lang talaga ang power to tax natin. Okay? For which the tax is supposed to compensate. But we have this international committee. This is again, review lang to. Courteous recognition and friendly agreement among the countries, interaction and respect accorded by uh, one nation to the laws and institutions of another. So, one foreign state may not be taxed by another because the principle of sovereign equality among shares. Example, reciprocity. Diba? Kung hindi natin tataksan ang mga in-check dito sa Pilipinas, it could probably mean that hindi din magbibigay din ng tax exemption ang bansang China para sa mga Pilipino. So that's international committee, the granting of reciprocity. Pero hindi naman sa lahat ng transactions nila dito sa Philippines at transactions natin sa Pilipinas ay doon sa China is tax exempt lahat. On certain type of transactions lang. Hindi naman pwede na lahat exempted. Although kailangan natin ng foreign investments kasi it really creates employment for the betterment of our economy, diba? So, binibigyan sila ng government ng tax incentives. Pero hindi naman lahat ng income nila dito sa Pilipinas is tax exempt. Binibigyan lang, okay, ng privileges because nakatulong din sila sa bansa natin or sa economy. Okay? So, that's territorial jurisdiction. Next is taxation is subject to international committee. And nasabi ko na yun kanina, courteous recognition and friendly agreement. And the last, inherent limitation is government entities are generally tax exempt. Yes, we already reviewed this one. On the previous material, generally they are exempted in nature kasi na nga, hindi niya na pwedeng taksan yung sarili niya. The government cannot tax itself. Kaya siya, they are generally tax exempt. Pero once the government or providing or conducting or engaging proprietary functions. Okay. So these are subject to tax na. Okay, for example, Philippine National Railways and National Power Corporation. So they are doing proprietary functions, therefore their income will be subject to tax na. But again, generally, government entities and any local government units are generally tax exempt. Okay, so, tapos na tayo sa inherent limitations. We will proceed to the constitutional limitations. Okay, so constitutional limitations. The provisions of the fundamental law of the land that restrict the supreme, plenary, unlimited, and comprehensive exercise by the state of its inherent power to tax. Since napaka-powerful ng taxation power. And again, it is the strongest tax power among the inherent powers of the state. Kaya, kailangan nating limitahan yung taxation power. Ano yung purpose? Para maging uniform naman lahat at hindi siya magiging unfair from one municipality to another municipality. So, taxation must be uniformly adopted or ginawan ng Constitution para maging or ma-refine yung power to tax natin. So these are constitutional limitations. Okay, so we have the first one is the due process of law. According to Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution that provides, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor shall any person be denied by equal protection of the laws. So, klarong-klaro yan. Alam natin na napaka common or popular nitong due process clause natin. So the phrase is, it mandates that the fundamental right of protection of life, liberty, or property shall not be taken away from any person. It could be natural or juridical if it is exercised. If its exercise is not contrary to the fundamental law of the land, and it is done after compliance with established procedure prescribed by the law. Meaning, the due process means giving notice to the taxpayer that provides him hearing, the chance, di ba? Ayan, as to given a fair opportunity, mapagilty ka man or hindi, bibigyan ka ng fair treatment and opportunity to assert your substantial rights, okay, before a competent court. So you have the right to remain silent, ayan, unless otherwise, okay, uh, it shall be denied or deprived of his property for non-payment of tax. Hindi talaga, okay? You cannot be denied or deprived of life or liberty or property kung hindi ka nabibigyan ng oportunidad na mapakinggan sa korte. So that's due process of law. Okay? Ayan. So next is equal protection of law. So equal protection of law means that all persons subject to legislation shall be treated alike under similar circumstances and conditions, both in the privileges conferred and liabilities imposed. mayaman ba tayo or mahihirap, as long as you are liable to pay tax and according sa requisites ng certain tax na to, you are qualified to pay your tax because you have business and you have transactions that involves taxation. You are allowed, you are required to pay your tax. Okay? So, yan yung ibig sabihin ng equal protection. So the purpose of the constitutional mandate is to protect persons belonging to the same class against intentional and arbitrary discrimination. So that's the meaning or importance or relevance of equal protection of law. Next is rule of uniformity and equity and taxation. So under section 4 or section 6, article 6, section 28 rather, of paragraph 1 of the Constitution that states that the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. Uniform. Kung ano ang tax natin dito sa Mindanao, yun din yung tax treatment doon sa Luzon at Visayas. Okay, so a tax is said to be uniform in application if it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject may be found, not when it singles one out one particular class for taxation or exemption. Hindi pwedeng exempt dito sa Mindanao. Magbabayad ng tax doon si Luzon ng VAT. Hindi pwede yun. Hindi wala uniformity at equality doon. Diba? Dapat fair lang. Uniform. Okay, so the primary requisite of equity is that the progressive tax rate shall be applied equally to all persons. Limbawa, if individual, tapos you are taxable using the graduated tax rate, yun yung magiging basihan mo in computing your tax kung dito ka sa place mo. Ganon din kung kahit saan ka man, sa Luzon or sa Visayas. That's uniformity and equality. Okay? So nabanggit ko na kanina, progressive tax system po ang ginagamit natin and it is based on the principle of what? Ability to pay or theoretical justice. Okay, so ayan. Next tayo. President's power to veto separate items in revenue or tariff bills. Okay, so this is also in accordance with Article 6, Section 27, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution that states that every bill passed by the Congress shall, before it becomes a law, bago siya maging batas, be presented to the President. So if he approves the same, he shall sign it, or otherwise, he shall veto it and return the same with its objections at large and its journal and proceed to reconsider it. So yung veto power is the executive's power, the president's power to refuse to sign. Kapag hindi niya gusto yung batas, lahat man or some parts of it, yan, hindi niya sasignan yan, magpipirmahan. Okay? Para maging bill or batas. So, we have different forms of veto. It could be item veto power or pocket veto power. Ang item veto power is, for example, train law. Ginawa ng Kongreso ng ng batas. Tapos ayaw lang ni Pangulong Duterte ng some parts or provisions of the requirements to be taxable. So tatanggalin niyo yung isang requirement to. So that's item veto power. The rest approved na. So that's item veto. Items lang on the bill na ipopropose. Pero kapag pocket veto power po guys, the disapproval of a bill by inaction of the President which results that the bill shall fail to become a law. Lahat ibabasura. Okay, hindi pipirmahan ng Pangulo. Pero if hindi pa pinirmahan ng Pangulo, sir, hindi na ba siya magiging batas at all? Okay, here's the answer. If the President vetoed the bill, okay, yung buo, 2/3 of the members of the House are required to make such bill a law. Meaning, kahit veneto yan ng Presidente, as long as yung boto ng lahat ng members ng House of Representatives or Congress natin, at least two-thirds of their vote, magiging batas pa din yan. Under the Constitution, the President does not have to be so-called pocket veto power because of his failure to communicate his veto of any bill presented him within 30 days after the date of the receipt thereof automatically causes the bill to become a law. So what if hindi siya nagbigay ng response niya kung aprobado ba yun or ibiveto niya? If within 30 days wala pang ganong decision, then automatically magiging batas na siya by default. Okay? So that's one of the first four constitutional limitations. Now, the next slide, exemption from property taxation of religious, charitable, or educational entities, non-profit cemeteries, churches, and convents appertaining thereto. So, exempted po. Okay? From real property taxes. Ano-ano yun? Kapag nasa sector ka ng religious, excuse me, charitable or educational entities, non-profit cemeteries, churches, and covenants appertaining thereto. Okay, the exemption is granted to them in return for the benefits they have afforded to the public welfare. Yan yung pinaka-purpose niya. The Supreme Court, however, held that such exemption for the above provision should be applicable only to real property taxes. Itong mga property na to na galing sa simbahan, sa charity, sa mga educational entities at non-profit cemeteries, churches, and convents, lahat kasi ng real property are liable to be paid for real property taxes every January. Kung property yan ng mga simbahan, charity, at so on, hindi na siya magiging liable to pay property taxes. Hindi kagaya ng ginagawa ni Manny Pacquiao. Maraming property, right? So every year, nagbabayad yan siya ng taxes because of his properties. Ang tawag doon is real property tax. Okay? Pero kapag galing sa simbahan, charity, and so on, according to number 5, exempted po. But only to real property, ha? So meaning, kapag dinonate yan from religious group doon sa members niya, dinonate niya. So magiging ano na yan, magiging taxable na yan for donor's tax. Ang hindi lang mabayaran dyan is yung property taxes. Sana maliwanag tayo doon ha. Hence, if the land owned by religious order is sold, halimbawa binenta, it is subject to final tax of 6% based on the selling price or fair market value, whichever is higher. So magiging ano siya, susceptible or taxable for capital gains tax. Okay? So sana klaro tayo na ang exempted lang dyan is only the real property tax. Next, no public money shall be appropriated for religious purposes. Therefore, public money is not for religious purposes. The limitation of this is fundamentally supported by the principle that taxes can only be levied for public purpose. Wala na pong iba. Thus, the Congress has no power to appropriate funds for private purposes with the exception specified in the above cited constitutional provisions. So the doctrine stated above that it is to be further stressed that the principle of separation of church and the state. Okay, separated po ang church at saka yung state. Therefore, hindi pwede na yung public funds shall be appropriated for religious purposes. I-donate na lang lahat. Okay? Kasi nga may separation ng church at saka yung state. Okay? And from the very sole principle that public money should be levied for public purposes. Hindi naman for public purposes yung donation for religious organizations. Diba? So yun yung yun yung ibig sabihin niya. Next is, excuse me, majority of all the members of the Congress granting tax exemptions. Okay, the majority of the members, no, granting tax exemptions. Ituloy na lang din natin yung number 8. Okay, the Congress may not deprive the Supreme Court of its jurisdictions in all cases involving the legality of any tax imposed or assessment or toll or any penalty imposed in relation to tax. Okay, begin tayo ulit sa number 7. Now, it should be observed that the above constitutional provision or yung number 7 natin requires the concurrence of a majority not of the attendees constituting a quorum but all of the members of the Congress. Lahat po ng members, lahat ng representative quorum as a safeguard against the indiscriminate grant of tax exemptions. Ano ba yung quorum? Majority plus 1 will constitute a quorum. But depende po yan kung ano yung other basis of quorum nila. Okay? But if wala namang other basis for quorum, majority plus 1 or 50% plus 1, quorum na yan. Okay? So, makakagrant ng tax exemption yung Kongreso upon majority vote, okay, of all the members, not only present, basta lahat ng representatives dapat makaboto, either in person or by mail or any other manner. Okay? So, ayan. The number 8, Congress may not deprive the Supreme Court of its jurisdiction in all cases. May kinalaman to sa mga tax cases. Kasi kapag mga tax cases, trabaho talaga to ng judiciary. Diba? Ayan. So therefore, here, the Supreme Court, okay, final judgment, nasa kanya yung last or final judgment sa lahat ng tax cases. Okay? So the Supreme Court shall have the power to review, revise or reverse, modify or affirm and appeal or certiorari as the laws of the rules of court may provide final judgments and orders of lower courts in all cases involving legality of any tax imposed, assessment, or toll or any penalty imposed in relation thereto. So this number 8 also furtherly explains that no law shall be passed increasing the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court as provided in the Constitution without its advice and concurrence. So the power of judicial review and taxation is limited only to the interpretation and application of tax laws. Mag-i-interpret lang tayo. Okay? Or mag-i-interpret lang si judicial. Okay, rather. Ayan, judicial review. I-interpret lang yung tax laws. Kasi nga, 'di ba, si Kongreso yung gagawa ng tax laws. Ang judiciary or the Supreme Court, okay, or any regional trial court or ano natin dito is magi-interpret lang sila. Okay? And the judicial tribunals have no concern on the wisdom of taxing act. Its power does not include inquiry on the policy of the legislation. Hindi naman nila tatanungin bakit ganito. Bakit in-impose itong tax na to? Hindi. Hindi naman sila magki-question. Ang magiging trabaho lang nila, i-interpret yung tax laws at sila yung magde-decide. Okay? Nasa kanila yung final decision on all tax cases. Okay? If ever lang naman may mga nangyayaring kasuhan between the BIR and the taxpayers. Okay? Yan. Aside from that, no imprisonment for non-payment of poll tax. Poll tax, guys, is a community tax. Hindi nyo pa alam siguro, it is otherwise known as cedula. Okay? So wala pong nakukulong kung hindi ka naman nagbabayad ng poll tax or community tax. Okay? The term poll tax means a tax imposed on a person as a resident within territory of the taxing authority without regard to his property, business, or occupation. A good example is community tax. It is to be noted that the prohibition of imprisonment applies only to the non-payment of poll tax. Poll tax lamang po, okay? Consequently, imprisonment for non-payment of other taxes or imposition of fine would not be contrary to the Constitution. Pero kapag poll tax lang naman, hindi ka naman makukulong. Okay? And number 10, tax collection shall be generally be treated as general funds of the government. So that's in accordance with Article 6, Section 29, that all money collected on any tax levied for special purpose shall be treated as a special fund and paid out for such purpose only. If the purpose for which a special fund was created has been fulfilled and abandoned, the balance, if any, shall be transferred to the general funds of the government. May mga special funds tayo. At kung hindi naman siya nagagamit, napupunta siya or na-forward siya sa general funds. Thus, therefore, the collection of fee with the nature of taxes intended for the promotion of sugar industry shall be treated as a special fund. Such fund shall be used for its intended purpose for the sugar industry. Okay? And none of its parts shall be used for exclusive benefit of any private person. Kasi nga, public funds are for public purposes only. Once the purpose is achieved, and there are also unspent amount pa, may sobra. So ito transfer siya from special fund as to the general funds of the government. So yun po yung constitutional limitations natin. Okay? Ituloy natin dito sa Situs of Taxation. It is based on the inherent limitation that um, taxation is only applicable within its territorial jurisdiction. Okay, so that's Citus. General rule, the state has the power to impose tax only within its territorial jurisdiction. So we have the following factors that are determinants to the Citus of Taxation or place. So the nature, kind, and classification of the tax being imposed, the subject matter of the tax, it could be person, diba? Hindi lang kasi person ang magiging subject matter ng tax, it could also be property. Kanina, the property yung real property, kailangan magbayad ng real property taxes. So hindi naman tao yun. It could also be rights, okay? Or activity, ayan. Or events. Aside from that, source of the income being taxed. And then the place, the excise, privilege, business, or occupation being taxed. And the citizenship of the taxpayer. And last but not the least, the residence of the taxpayer. So yan po yung magiging determinants natin with regards to Situs of Taxation. So, klarong-klaro naman yan, right? So, I hope naintindihan. Okay? So, itong Citus lang naman to magiging taxable ka or yung uh, yung tax liability mo babayaran mo depende kung nasaan ka. Okay, for example, Gensan, you'll be a taxpayer sa Gensan. Okay? Kung citizenship mo, you will be a taxpayer if citizen ka within and without. Income mo dito sa sa Pilipinas at income mo doon sa labas. Pwede corresponding tax credit lang kasi magiging taxpayer ka din doon sa labas ng bansa. Ayan. So, yung tax credit na yan, malalaman lang natin yan when we go beyond. So, huwag mo na excited. Okay? So, kung saan yung place, bawa object, property taxes, kung nasaan nakalocate yung property, doon ka magbabayad ng real property tax. Okay? Ayan. Kung individual ka naman at may income ka, compensation or self-employment, so ikaw mismo ang taxpayer, magbabayad ka ng income mo kung saan ka naka-register or naka-reside. Okay? So, those are the Citus of Taxation. So I hope naging madali sa inyo ang pag-intindi ng inherent limitation, constitutional limitation, and the situs of taxation. So thank you so much for listening. Okay, and see you next meeting for our next video tutorial.